Okay, hello everyone. Get ready to duck because I'm going to be talking about Google Actions with a ping-pong catapult. My name is DiPatri and I'm from Comcast up in Philadelphia. So this talk is actually a summary of a workshop. It's a 2-hour workshop that I wrote and it's online. It's available at this URL. It's a Google Doc. And so it's a workshop. So any details that I omit in this talk, you can go to that online doc and dive deep. So what we're going to be doing today is building a conversation. We're going to be using natural language as a user interface. Now, we've all had these conversations with Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, and they seem real, but we all know they're not, right? They need to be designed ahead of time. And that's what we're going to do today. So this raises the question, with what are we going to converse with today, right? So I wanted us to talk to something real, something we could see, right? I wanted it to be a simple machine that had some kind of state to it. And so I was playing with my kids with hot glue guns and popsicle sticks, of course. And we made these little toy catapults. So I figured, okay, well, why not use a catapult as a thing to control with the conversation? So the funny thing is yesterday I went for a run around town here, and I kind of had this moment of crisis. I'm like, really? I'm going to actually sit in a room, stand in front of a bunch of professionals, teaching them Google Actions, and we're going to use a toy. And then I saw this, in front of the Denver Art Museum on my run. It said, play is the highest form of research. So I figured, okay, this is the validation I needed. This is good. I'm going to use a catapult, and we're going to have a toy, and we're going to do this. So we're going to dive into this talk. First, I'm going to talk about. First, it's funny, I don't even notice the mic's not off because I have such a big mouth. So I guess I'll have to talk quieter. Let me know if I'm blowing you out of the water with my voice. It takes a second to boot up. I'm not sure why, but there you go. Okay. Hey, everybody. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the catapult and how it is you build something that you can control with a conversation. Okay, then we're going to talk about how you design that conversation. Then I'm going to get into the setup and the build process for creating a Google action, which is how you implement this conversation in the cloud. So we're stepping outside of our Android comfort zone with this talk. Okay, and then finally I'll end up with a live demo where we'll demonstrate this thing. I don't know if you all can see it, but this is the infamous catapult that I've been talking about. Okay, so the catapult. So of course the catapult has this top. It's an egg crate. I glued on top there, and this is where you this is where you put the ping pong ball. And down here, if you can see, my clicker's not working great. Let me see here. Down here, I want to zoom in on this. So this is called a servo, this blue thing you see there, and there's a little hook, a 3D printed hook on it. That servo, it's basically a motor that's geared, so it's pretty powerful. And when you actuate the servo, the hook opens and closes. So you can imagine what's happening here is as I pull the catapult back, right, the hook grabs on to the arm, right? And then if I actuate the servo again, the hook releases and the arm flies and the ping pong ball goes flying. So that's the general idea of the catapult. And that workshop has documentation on how to actually build this catapult if you feel like you want to be an 8-year-old and build a popsicle stick catapult. And then finally we have this thing, which is the microcontroller that's on the catapult. So let's talk a moment about that microcontroller. It's the catapult brain, right? It's the particle photon microcontroller, and it's Arduino based. So the interesting thing to note is that you can actually program this thing online. There's an online IDE for programming this catapult, and it's based in C and C++, which should be pretty recognizable to everyone in this room. And the cool thing is not only can you program this catapult from the cloud, you can also execute functions on the catapult. And so it's cloud accessible. So let's look for a moment at the code that's running on this catapult actually up here. So first is we're configuring the servo, okay? And then the particle has tons of libraries. So controlling a servo is definitely something it does out of the box. And then we make this function here, okay? And you can see the servo, whenever you actuate the catapult, it opens the servo to 90 degrees, then it closes the servo. So the hook does this whenever you actuate it. You got me? So the cool thing is that the same actuate function both grabs onto the catapult arm and releases the catapult arm. You got that? So it's very simple. So now And then the really interesting thing, this is where you take the actuate function that we just wrote, that actuates the servo, and now we expose it to the cloud. We tell Particle, let this thing be accessible in the cloud. And that's the hot sauce. So yeah, I'm going to put down the clicker because it's not working. So we have our actuate function, which can be called from anywhere in the world, right? And so then we do, you see an example here. This is a curl function, which can do an HTTP request. And this URL here is called a webhook. It's how you talk to the Catapult. And this one line, here it is, actuate. That's our function that we wrote, right? And so here is us, device ID is this particular Catapult. So this is how you talk to this Catapult from anywhere in the world to actuate that servo. Done. We've just built something that you can control with a conversation, for example, from anywhere in the world. So now let's talk about that conversation. How do we design that conversation with this Catapult? So first, conversational flow is tedious. You need some upfront design first, and it's highly recommended. I, of course, ignored this advice and tried just building Google Actions right off the bat. And there's enough pieces involved with building a Google Action that you have to undo a lot of stuff if you just start off on the right path. So you really want to just spend a little bit of time up front designing the conversation. And also you want to start with a happy path. Don't worry about just weird failure paths and weird things that a person might say in a conversation. You really just want to worry about the happy path. So let's do, before we go into the conversation a little bit more, let's talk about a couple terms in Google Actions. Okay, first is intent, right? An intent is a user's request or ambition. What does a user want to do? They've just said something. What is it they want to do, right? I want to get the Catapult ready. I want to load the Catapult. I want to fire the Catapult, right? So these are intents. Each of those things is an intent, okay? A conversation is merely streaming a bunch of intents together. Now, Google Action is when you both identify, it's the cloud both identifying the current intent and then fulfilling it in some way. That is the Google Action. Okay, so this is like a speech bubble example of our conversation. Let's go through that. On the left side is me speaking, and on the right side is the Catapult, okay? So can everybody see that okay? You guys in the back, everybody, all you folks in the back, there aren't just guys back there, I apologize. Can everyone see okay? I got a thumbs up, excellent. So the first thing is, yo Google. Okay, first of all, I'm not gonna say okay in this talk because I don't want everybody's phones to wake up and get mad at me. And so, I'm from Philly, and if you've seen Rocky, yo Adrian, that's how we talk. So I'm gonna say yo Google, and I'm not just trying to be hip, I'm just trying to make everybody not upset with me. So, yo Google, talk to my Ping-Pong Catapult. That's how I start the conversation. Welcome, let me know when you are ready. That's my Catapult voice. Okay. I'm ready. Want to load the Catapult? Yes. So now I pull back the arm on the Catapult, right? Do that. And then the Catapult will actually grab onto the arm of the Catapult. And then it responds, Catapult is loaded. Set your target and let me know when to launch a Ping-Pong Catapult. That's my Catapult voice. Do you like that? Is that better? Okay. And I say fire. Now the Catapult, once again, actuates the servo. It releases the ping-pong ball. Like this. Okay. Did you catch that? And then the Catapult responds and says, great shot. Ready to start again, or do you want to say goodbye? Ready. So here's an example of where I'm calling the conversation to start over again, right? It's a cyclical conversation because I want to launch a lot of these. Okay, so there's three things I want you to notice. There's three steps in that action lifecycle. First is a user making a request, the invocation of the intent. Fire, okay? Sorry, that was actually okay, I'm confused about these voices already. I could never do voiceovers. Okay, so fire. Now what happens? Sometimes the Catapult did something. It actuated the servo, right? But sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the Catapult just responded and prompted the user and said, great shot. Ready to start again, or do you want to say goodbye? Now, it's not acknowledging it did something, but it's also cueing me as to what the user should say next, how the user should continue the conversation. That's important, okay? You want to guide the user through the conversation. Also, a conversation needs two different types of intents. It needs a root intent. Okay, the root intent can be invoked from anywhere in the conversation. In this example, ready is the root intent. So anywhere in the conversation, if I say ready, it's going to start over, right? Now there's another type of intent called a follow-up intent. And that's invoked only following another intent. So for example, if I say fire, it makes sense, right, if I've already loaded the catapult. And again, so this isn't a talk about catapults, right? You're supposed to kind of stretch your brain here and think about other conversations with other things. There's statefulness to it, right? So you can't fire until you've loaded, right? You can't order a cheeseburger until you've, I don't know, walked into the McDonald's. I don't know. So that's the idea, okay? So also, if you have a long conversation with someone, you may have said yes 5 times in that conversation, but how that yes is responded to is very different depending on when you've said it, right? And in what context. So the follow-up intent is very important. It's critical for natural language flow. And in fact, we can actually think of a conversation as a state machine. Okay, and so it's really helpful. That first earlier diagram I showed you with how to design a conversation, that was cool, throw it out. That's not really good engineering practice. What you really want to do is use a state diagram, okay? So I won't go through the entire thing again, but this is a state diagram. You have a bunch of steady states, and then you have things that cause a transition state, okay? So right off the bat, I say, yo, Google, talk to my Ping-Pong catapult. Now that actually starts a conversation, and then that invokes the special intent called a welcome intent, which I'll go into in a moment. The welcome intent doesn't do anything except it responds back to the user and says, ahoy, Nick, let me know when you're ready. So that's a cue, right? So now the user knows to say, yes, I'm ready. Now that invokes our root intent. And the root intent just responds, want to load the catapult? And the user says, yes. Now, this transition, you can only when you say yes here does it then transition to the load follow-up intent, right? If you say yes somewhere else, it's not going to go to the load intent, right? You follow? So this is important. Now, this intent actually does do something. It actuates the server, it does something under the covers, and then it sends response back to the user, let me know when you want to fire the catapult. So that's the general idea. And then we do that again for launching the catapult. And then down here, we say ready again, and we go back to the beginning. We start over. So this is how you want to document a conversation with a state diagram. Okay, so we've done that now. So we've talked about the catapult. We've talked a little bit about conversational design. Now let's start to set up the cloud portion of this, the Google Action. So to give you an overview of an architecture we're talking about. Sorry, I'm looking over here too, folks. I apologize. I'm stuck behind the catapult, but I love all you over there too. Okay, so the overall architecture diagram is we've got speech happening on the left over here. The user saying something important. I don't know, right? And so then this text gets sent to the cloud. Now the cloud the action has to do 2 things. It needs to determine the user's intent at that moment and then fulfill that intent, okay? They're the 2 things. So let's start creating this Google Action, okay? So we're gonna go to the Actions console and we're gonna click on Add Import Project. We're gonna add a project, okay? And that's the first step. Okay, in the Action console, you're going to do a couple things, not a whole lot. You're going to create a customized conversation project. There are a bunch of different projects you can create in Google in the Google Actions console. You can do all different kinds of integrations. You can actually drive a conversation with an Excel spreadsheet with Google Actions. We're not doing that. We're developers. We're going to do this hardcore, right? So we're going to create a customized conversation. Now, another thing I want to kind of convey here is that if you read the Google Actions documentation, there's some confusion with these different terms. We've created a project. That's the same thing as a Google Action, okay? This Google Action kind of encompasses the whole conversation. So a project and a Google Action and a conversation are all the same thing for our purposes, right? That's helpful. The only last thing we're going to do in the Actions console is define our invocation phrase for the whole conversation, right? In this case, it's yo Google, talk to my Ping-Pong catapult. Okay, so that's all we're doing in the Google Actions console. The next thing you go to is Dialogflow, which is a different cloud component. And the Dialogflow is really the brains of Google Actions. It's this cool thing that does natural language understanding. I mean, this is pretty amazing, controlling things with your voice, right? I mean, this is pretty cool stuff. So Dialogflow is like the brains behind that. And now we can fill out our architecture diagram a little better now. Let's say we see on the left, we have Google Assistant running on our Android phone or our Google Macs. And we say, yo, Google, talk to my Ping-Pong catapult. That's a wake word. It's called a wake word. And it actually fires up the Google Assistant and tells it to start sending audio to the server. Now it goes up to the server. Dialogflow then interprets that speech and determines which user intent to fire off and then how to fulfill it. Okay, so Now let's look at the actual Dialogflow dashboard. Okay, so here we have the intents tab. You click on that. And then we see we have this default welcome intent. You get this for free whenever you create a new Google Actions project. Now if you remember the default welcome intent, that's the thing that responds to the conversation invocation. Yo, Google, talk to my Ping-Pong Catapult. The welcome intent is what handles that. It's what responds to that. Okay, so if we click on that, if we go inside of the welcome intent, we can see that there's a bunch of responses that have already been provided for us. Hi, how are you doing? Hello, how can I help you? These are randomly chosen and they're sent back over as voice back to the user. So what we've done here is we've kind of done this internal fulfillment. Dialogflow itself has fulfilled, it's not only has it detected the intent, but it's fulfilled it itself and said, hello, how can I help you? So that's kind of cool. We've got something working now, right? We've got a Google action here, a conversation, very simple one, but we want to step it up a notch. Sorry, I move my head a certain way and I magnify my voice. Sorry, I apologize. So we want to step it up a notch and do something interesting. We want to do external fulfillment, right? We're developers. We want to build this thing, an external Kotlin endpoint that's going to talk to Dialogflow and handle these intents for us, right? And so Dialogflow there's a whole API around this where Dialogflow will encapsulate all the metadata about this intent that it just discovered and send this over JSON to this webhook that we create somewhere else. So let's talk about that webhook. So it used to be that in order to create this external endpoint for Dialogflow, you needed to use Firebase functions running on a Node.js server. And hey, I'm not a hater. I love Node.js. I'm just not very good at it. So I did this whole thing with Node.js. I had to learn Node.js. It was really tough. And so thankfully, in January of this year, Google came out with a Java-based library. Remember, this is the thing that lets Dialogflow talk to any endpoint to defer fulfillment of our intent. We got that? That's what I'm talking about here. That's what this SDK does. So we're gonna take our endpoint and we're gonna host it on an App Engine instance running in the Google Cloud Platform, or GCP. Okay. Now, for those of you who don't know what a servlet is, the servlet is actually what's going to encompass our Java code, Java Kotlin code, right? For those I assume we're all familiar with Kotlin, but Kotlin basically runs in a Java VM. So if you got something that supports Java, it supports Kotlin, right? So servlet is basically something that just wraps Java and exposes it as an HTTP endpoint. So you can make HTTP requests against your Java code. Yay, and you can make an endpoint. So that's what we got here. So building this Kotlin endpoint, where's my drink? Building this Kotlin webhook involves two steps. Okay, first is we create this, in the cloud, we log into the Google console and we create a vanilla app engine. It's like a virtual machine up in the cloud for us, right? And we do that and it's a vanilla, we don't configure it. It's like click, 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 and it's there. Again, this is in the workshop documentation, which I'll post the URL again on the channel, if not up here. And then the other part you do all locally. You download some boilerplate servlet project and you actually write your Kotlin code in this local project. So this project contains a Gradle target, and when you run this target, it actually configures the app engine, pushes up your Kotlin code, does everything. So it actually is not as scary as it sounds. There's a couple of clicks, and so mostly what you're doing here is you're writing Kotlin code, okay? So once you have that, your code's pushed up, and you use this Gradle target, you now have, it pushes the code up and it gives you this URL back. This is how the app engine responds. It gives you back this URL. That is your webhook. That's anybody in the world can connect to that and talk to your Kotlin endpoint. And so what you need to do is you need to go back in the Dialogflow and finish that loop. You need to go into Dialogflow and say, hey, the way you're going to fulfill these intents is by talking to this remote endpoint that I've made. And you put that webhook there, okay? So we've done this. We now have our Google console. We have this project created, Google Actions project. We have Dialogflow set up to handle your speech and then identify the intents. And then it sends those intents that come in, it sends them information to our external servlet to fulfill it, right? We've done all that. Okay, now let's actually build some Google Actions. So now we go back to the Dialogflow dashboard. Okay, there's the URL, console.dialogflow.com. And then we click on the Intents tab, okay? And then, now the UI of Dialogflow is not great. You click on the Intent, the Create Intent tab, And that's how we create our intents. But it's only how we create our root intent. It's kind of weird. So this is our ready intent, right? This is the ready intent, remember, is when this is the thing it's when you're ready and it says, let me know when you want to load the catapult. It responds to you saying ready. That's a ready intent. So I say ready, and then the ready intent fires off and says, let me know when you want to load the catapult. So that's the root intent. Remember, I can invoke that from any time during the conversation ready, so it's a root intent and it occurs there. Now the follow-up intents are different. Now here's a weird thing. You don't click on create intent. You have to mouse over, literally you have to like go in here and mouse over this area. It's like an Easter egg. And then you click on it to create your follow-up intents. It's kind of wild. So now we've created our follow-up intents. We have ready, catapult, load, launch. Okay, we have all three of our intents created in Dialogflow. Now the next thing is, okay, we've created these intents. We kind of get the idea, but how do we invoke the intents? Like how do we train Dialogflow to that? So when I say ready, it launches a ready intent. Those are called training phrases. Okay, so look at our ready catapult intent. How do you invoke that intent? That's where you put it in the training phrases section. So let's look at that. So here we've added the ready. So here we've added the ready phrase. So when I say ready, it invokes the ready intent. But you want your conversation to be flexible, right? So for example, if someone says, let's do this. So when you say, yo, Google, talk to my Ping-Pong catapult, it says, let me know when you're ready. And I can say, let's do this, right? That's more cool than just saying, ready. So you have to make your conversations flexible, right? And you do that with multiple training phrases. So here I put in, let's do this as well. It's not brilliant. It doesn't know this stuff until you tell it, okay? You have to train it, just like we learned yesterday with machine learning. So I've identified something interesting here. What if the user says, what am I getting ready for? Right, they said the word ready, but they said some other words around it. Now, I wanted to use this as like a contrived example to demonstrate a few more features of Dialogflow. In this example, we're trying to identify a user that might be confused. So not all users are the same, and this is important to keep in mind not only in life, but when you're writing code, okay? So words before and after ready, in this case, I'm going to say indicate confusion, right? Now, this isn't perfect, but this is an iterative process. So how do we capture parts of the user's response other than just saying, oh, you launched this intent? This is what Dialogflow calls slot filling. This is a way to collect parameters from your training phrase. So this yellow you see here isn't part of my slides. This is actually in Dialogflow. You can actually highlight text, and you can define it as a parameter. So what I've done is I've highlighted the text around ready and said, let's call this the confusion parameter. Ooh, foreboding. So what's going to happen then is the Dialogflow, not only is it going to indicate, oh, this is a ready intent, it's also going to indicate there's some kind of confusion parameter going on. And it's going to send that down to our fulfillment endpoint. And that's what we're doing. That's what Dialogflow is going to do with that confusion parameter. So if you want to look at the code, this is actually my Kotlin fulfillment code. And if you look here, you can see I check to see if the confusion parameter exists. And if it does, I kind of accommodate a user that may be a little confused. So my response is more verbose, right? Now you would not want this every time you use a catapult because it would just be too long to wait to sling some ping pong balls. So if you don't have a confusion parameter, it just says, want to load the catapult? That's my catapult voice, remember? Okay. So that's slot filling, parameters, training phrases, right? Creating intents. Now let's do some local work. We have this thing set up in the cloud. We have our Google action defined. We have our intents created, right? So now you're going to work on your local code, and that's where you download this boilerplate local servlet project. This is where you're going to write your Kotlin code. And again, there's not that much boilerplate going on here. It's mostly just that Java SDK that I was talking about. It's the code that knows how to talk to Dialogflow, okay? So I have a GitHub project, and again, I'll put a link to these slides up. Actually, they're already in the Slack channel. I put the slides channel. Slides channel, there is the link to this whole talk, and so you can get that. Anyway, here's where you pull down that project. And my project, my GitHub repo, it's got multiple branches for different levels of complexity in the workshop. So you pull down this code. Let's go through some of this code real quick. So this is the root servlet. This is like the thing that responds to Dialogflow talking to me, right? My endpoint. It's this HTTP servlet, and the important thing I want to show you here is this class called MyActionsApp. This is like a delegate. This is this is what is, so what all this SDK does is it takes all this like JSON and it converts it into, serializes it into objects, actually into a request, and then it passes that request onto this delegate, this My Actions app. So it turns out all the real work of your endpoint is being done in this one class. So that's all you really have to modify is this one class, and that's right here, My Actions app. Okay, and so here it extends Dialogflow app, so we get a bunch of helper functions and everything, right? And so what we have here is a function. Each function corresponds to an intent that we've created in Dialogflow, right? So we'll need a ready function, a load function, and a launch function, right? So this one is for the welcome intent, and I know that because it's annotated. This is how you tell Dialogflow which function to call. So here I've annotated this function, default welcome intent. That name has to match the name that's in Dialogflow. So here, this is when the person's invoked. Yo, Google, talk to my Ping-Pong Catapult. It launches, it calls this function. This is really cool, man. Now we have like a function. We're like where the rubber meets the road. We're like talking to a function that's going to make stuff happen based on voice. I mean, I think it's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting. Okay, I'm relaxing now. Okay, I'm relaxed. So how do we implement this function? So we have this get response builder. This is how we build our response. It's a response object, which is going to get serialized back into JSON and sent back to Dialogflow. Okay. Now, everybody here, I mean, I assume most of you are kind of into Kotlin, they've been using Kotlin, but I think we should just really accommodate all types of people at this conference. So I'm not going to assume you know a lot about Kotlin, right? So what this apply function is, see .apply? That's a helper function in Kotlin. And what it does is when you call it on an object, that object becomes what's called the implicit receiver of the following code block. That means any function you call in that code block will be called on that implicit receiver, that object. It's one of the ways in which Kotlin makes your code cleaner and more smooth. So here our implicit receiver is this response builder. So as I call functions, I'm adding to this response object. Okay? And here what we're doing is we're creating the response in text that's going to get spoken back to the user. In this case, let me know when you're ready. And then here we end the conversation. Now, if you had multiple intents chained together as we do, you would not call end conversation here. I just did this to show you how you do that. Okay, well that's the nuts and bolts of writing it. Now, how do you get down and really start how to start writing this code and developing this? First, you need to understand that Android Dev Studio won't like this project. This is not an Android project, okay? What you need to use is some other kind of ID. I recommend IntelliJ, mostly because it's what Android Dev Studio is based on, right? So all your plugins, I'm a VI guy, so I use my VI plugin, and it works great. So what you're doing then is you're creating Google Actions, is you are updating your Dialogflow intents, right? You're creating them, modifying them, and then you're pushing up your Kotlin code to GCP using that Gradle target, right? And then you're going to test your changes. So what you're going to find as you start playing around with this is you're going to be talking to your phone, yo, Google, talk to my Ping-Pong Catapult. It's going to talk back to you, fire, whatever. And you might get kicked out of the coffee shop if you're just doing too much talking to your phone, right? And so Google has created this conversation simulator. And the way you get to that is in Dialogflow, you click over here. There's a little link over here, right? And that launches this thing, the conversation simulator. Now, the conversation simulator has an area where you can define your surface, whether you're using your Google Assistant on your phone or your Google Home Max, a big speaker thing at home. And then down here is where you type in. You can actually type in and get back text, so you don't have to talk at all. But you can click a microphone icon, so you can talk if you want. I'll actually use this in a moment to demonstrate the Catapult. Okay. And then actually it shows the output of your conversation in what would appear in this case on the phone. So the simulator is pretty powerful. Okay, another thing I want to say is that your Google Action, it runs on all of your devices right off the bat. So if you create one of these things, you can just pick up your phone and start talking. It's pretty neat. Now, it won't work on anybody else's phone until you deploy this thing to production, which I'm not going to go over here. Okay, let's get back to the original point of all this, is the Catapult. It's all about the Catapult, right? So remember, we created a webhook with our Catapult, how we call it actuate function. Remember that? So what we want to do is we want to take that and call that inside of our Kotlin code using, for example, OKHTTP, which is what I do for this particular demonstration. Now, here's one thing. If you just try doing that without another step, it just won't work, and it won't be obvious why. The reason is this is also the case with Firebase functions. You need to create a billing account and add a credit card. It doesn't charge your credit card I mean, if you're like me, Google already owns you, so it doesn't really matter. But you need to give it a credit card so that it authenticates who you are. And the reason for that is they don't want people, I guess, they don't want people creating, these kind of web cloud endpoints going out and connecting to things in the world. That could be dangerous. They need some accountability. So I've never been charged, and I talk to Catapults all day and do goofy stuff. You just don't get charged for the stuff if you're just messing around and doing, demonstration stuff. So there are other ways to integrate Particle with Google Actions, but I wanted to do this low-level way using OKHTTP to show you folks. So just a note on that. Okay, so that's actually it for the going through how to create Google Actions. What I want to do now is I'm going to demonstrate the Catapult. Okay, so I'm going to turn this on. Now, again, it's a cloud-based device, so it has to have a Wi-Fi connection. And so here it is. All right, so can everybody see this okay? This is the Catapult. And so I pull up the arm back and shoot. Okay, so let's, now I think what I want to do, oh, by the way, I have 4 particle photons, microprocessors. They're like $35 each. It's actually, it fits into a suitcase. They're kind of cool. So the company was nice enough to give me a bunch of these to give away. Okay, so let's get and start this and see what happens. Okay, here we are. I'm back on the Google Assistant. Can everybody see that okay? Okay, so now I'm going to say, talk to my Ping-Pong Catapult.
Sure, getting the test version of my Ping-Pong Catapult. Ahoy, let me know when you are ready.
Can everybody hear that okay? Kind of? Okay, I just got to know where to lean. All right. So it's cued me. That was a welcome intent. Let me know when you're ready. So I'm going to click, I'm ready.
Want to load the Catapult?
Okay, so now I say yes. So now I'm going to pull the arm back, and the servo is actuated. Okay, it's closed. So now it's locked. You see that? Now it's loaded. Did you everybody hear that? It said it did the next follow-up. You even heard that too? Oh, you got good ears. All right. So what am I saying next? The last thing it cued me, it says, let me know when you are ready to launch. Okay, so hey, I'm just going to say, fire. All right, good catch. All right, let's get you. All right, who wants another one? One more? How much time do we have? We have time. Another one? Okay, here's where it said to me, great shot, ready to start again, or do you want to say goodbye? Ready.
Want to load the Catapult?
Yes. Okay, I loaded it.
Catapult is loaded. Set your target and let me know when to launch the ping-pong ball.
All right, let's do an experiment. Let's everybody when I go like this, yell fire. It won't work. We'll see what happens. Fire. Yeah, I knew it would work. Fire. All right, nice. Everybody? Oh, that was a little high. Sorry. One more ball. Is that cool? One more. I have time. I talk fast, so I blew through that.
Responding right now. Try again soon.
Talk to my ping-pong catapult. One more, and then I'll take questions.
Here's the test version of my ping-pong catapult. Ahoy! Let me know when you are ready.
Ready.
Want to load the catapult?
Yes. Now, I mean, you see how you have to have like an expert mode because it gets really annoying listening to a whole bunch of text if you know how the conversation is going to go. So that's why you want to have it accommodated for different types of users.
Catapult is loaded. Set your target and let me know when to launch the ping-pong ball.
Fire. All right. Okay. Any questions? Who called that? You did? Nice. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, it's all right. Well, I think that's it. Oh, real quick, I did have another expert level. I did have an expert level catapult that I tried to make work today, but I just started building it last week, and it uses a bunch of 3D parts. Let's watch it real quick.
Want to load the catapult?
Sure.
Catapult is loaded. Set your target and let me know when to launch the ping-pong ball.
Fire. All right, there you go. So I tried to get that work today, and it didn't really work, but anyway, so thank you.